Really pleased to have joining us for the first time on the show, Sofia Hamilton. She's a social mobility fellow with Young Voices. That's a nonprofit organization, highlights and promotes contribution to young writers. And Sofia, a great piece in Reason.com, talking about welfare being great, but not necessarily for the right people. Tell us about that.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today, Boyd, and I'm glad that you liked the piece. So for my article in Reason, I had looked into the welfare system, particularly in Washington, D.C., and looked at welfare benefit cliffs, which is what happens when someone suddenly loses benefits because of a slight increase in their income, which pushes them over the welfare program's income eligibility threshold. So to show this phenomenon, I really wanted to show a real story of an individual in Washington, D.C., and so I spoke with a woman named Christy Gardner, who's lived in Washington, D.C. her entire life and has struggled through poverty and other issues and is currently on welfare, but her benefits have decreased dramatically. Some of the benefits she received have decreased over 90% in the past year, even though her income hasn't changed. It's been because of other programs she's received, like being reaching the age to be eligible for Medicaid. And so she's no better off. And so instead of relying on the government, has turned to nonprofit organizations to help bridge this gap in her income.
Yeah, and that's such an important thing. I've shared the story on this program before. I actually watched this in real time down in southern Utah. A young man who had been in prison, had been on drugs, been in the gang, been on the street, got his life together, got a job, got his children back, got housing. And I remember him coming into the office there, and he was so excited because he'd gotten a raise at his job because he was doing so well. And I remember his caseworker looking at him and saying, you can't accept the raise. You'll lose everything. You'll lose the kids. You'll lose the house, and these cliffs that you talk about. And so sometimes we end up with government programs well-intended, but often end up trapping people, or as we were just talking with former Representative Mia Love, that often they give people exactly what they need to stay exactly where they are. So how do we start changing that dynamic, and how do we do a better job of creating that upward mobility and a glide path, I guess, rather than those cliffs that you're describing?
It's a really hard thing to do, to fix the welfare state, because it's expanded dramatically. The welfare programs are administered at the federal, state, and even local levels, and they're incredibly confusing. There's different income eligibility levels for every program at these different levels. And even just at the federal level, there's over 100 different welfare programs. So to make it simpler for individuals and for these government offices, we need to consolidate these programs. There's a lot of programs that are very alike that administer food or clothing, and there's a lot of redundancy in the welfare state. And so consolidating would help a lot with program costs, of administrative costs, and it would lessen the bureaucracy of these programs. But that would really only be a start. To really then address the benefit cliffs, there would need to be a more gradual phase out of these programs. And that would be quite a tricky thing to do, because it would mean spending more money, but in the long run, the government would hopefully be spending less money, as these people would be pushed out of poverty instead of being stuck on these programs forever. They'd be able to get jobs and not be discouraged to take that raise, like the man that you were speaking about, because if they take that raise, they can still get a benefit that makes sense for the money that they're going to be making in the new job.
Yeah, and that's so important, because if they don't take that first job, then they don't get the next job, or they don't get that next raise or that next promotion. And if we really want upward mobility and self-reliance as the goal, you got to have a path to actually get there. And whether it's a single dad or a single mom, and suddenly they're saying, well, okay, if I take this job, that's going to have a negative impact on my children. No one's going to do that. That's just common sense. I'm going to do what's going to be best. And so often we end up treating people like liabilities to be managed, rather than people with infinite value and potential. to be developed. And so as you've dug into this, Sophia, give us a sense, especially coming from a younger American, looking at, one, how do we deal with the duplicative nature of a lot of those programs? How do we change the mindset, especially at the federal level, to say, look, we have all of this bureaucracy. It's time to really assess that to make sure there's no waste, fraud, or abuse, but mostly that we're actually getting results that are being more helpful to those that we're trying to help.
That's such a great question. And I think both the left and the right looks at welfare completely wrong. The left looks at it, we need to spend more money, create more programs, so these people are getting more help. And then the right thinks that we need to slash everything. These people are lazy, but we know that that's not the case. They're rational beings. They're going to take the money that they can, and if a job will push them out of a program, they're not going to take that job. They're not going to take that raise. So we need to find some middle ground of something that makes sense. So consolidating the programs, having more gradual phase out of these benefits, having programs where they're encouraged to work and where you're pairing these cash benefits in the welfare programs with also helping like job training and finding employment and also housing. So it's a more well-rounded program rather than just handing cash and then taking it away the second that they do what they're supposed to be doing the right thing that the government is telling them to do, what society is telling them to do. Instead of punishing them, you're encouraging them to work ahead and make a better life for themselves and their children.
Yeah, absolutely. Sofia Hamilton, Social Mobility Fellow with Young Voices. Great piece at reason.com. You should check that out today. Sophia, we appreciate you joining us, and I think this is the beginning of an important conversation. We had Joseph Grinney on our program last week, and so often we look at these issues and we think it's an asset problem. They just need more assets, more funding, more cash. Sometimes it's behavior. Sometimes it's skill set. But it's providing a different kind of path, but it all starts with a different kind of conversation. So, Sophia, thanks so much for helping us start that conversation. We look forward to having you back on the show soon.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Boyd.
Again, that's Sofia Hamilton, a Social Mobility Fellow with Young Voices. And this is really a great piece because so often we're looking at it backwards. And I think Sophia got it exactly right. Republicans are not looking at the issue the right way, and Democrats are not looking at the issue the right way. Because it's not about just spending more money, and it's not just about slashing money. It's having a different kind of conversation about what's the objective and what are we actually trying to do, and is what we're doing helping or hurting? And one of the biggest problems we have is, as Sophia mentioned, there's over 100 programs, over 100. And so many of them are duplicative. There's overlap of all kinds. There's waste, fraud, and abuse in the system. But the big issue for me is, let's just do an evaluation. Is it working? Is it helping people get out of poverty? Is it helping them with upward mobility? If we can have that kind of conversation, then it's not about just cutting or spending more. It's about producing the right results. And guess what? When we demand and are very clear about what the right result is, accountability is actually a pretty easy thing to do.